Great. So it's a really great privilege to welcome Habiba from 80,000 Hours to speak to Swarthmore Effective Altruism. Habiba is an advisor at 80,000 Hours. 80,000 Hours is a nonprofit working to solve the most pressing skill bottlenecks in the world's most pressing problems, and they provide really valuable career advice to early career professionals interested in effective altruism. Previously, Habiba served as a senior administrator for the Future of Humanity Institute and the Global Priorities Institute at Oxford. And with that, I'll hand it over to Habiba for a presentation. Afterwards, there will be a Q&A section where we can just unmute ourselves and ask questions. Great, so thanks, Habiba. I'll let you take it from here.
Cool, thank you, Abby. Yeah, I'm gonna do a presentation that goes through a bit of the general kind of 80,000 hours careers advice, and then also go through a bit more of like specific advice for undergraduates, which might be like particularly useful for people watching, and then Q&A. Feel free, I guess, to like ask questions, maybe just unmute yourself and ask questions as we go, or write them in the chat if you prefer, because I'm very happy to make this like as useful for people who are watching right now. So I am going to share my screen and present these slides. Can you see those? Fab. Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, as Abby said, I work for 80,000 hours at the moment, and the name 80,000 hours comes from sort of having 80,000 hours in your career and wanting to know how you can use those to best solve the world's most pressing problems. And to just run briefly through the things that we do. For a start, we do, sorry, hang on, I'm clicking on my links there. For a start, we do research. Let me use my keyboard. Okay, there we go. We do research into this issue to try and find out what some of the answers are and some sort of novel insights in this area. And then we try and take that research and produce online content. So most of our like important ideas are contained in our key ideas series. We also have a career planning process, which takes a lot of the same things, but puts it more in a sort of in the order that makes sense for you if you're thinking through your own career and trying to like go through those planning steps. In addition to that, we have the podcast, which I think was probably what I clicked on at that point. And we have a job board for finding specific roles. And we also make problem profiles and career reviews for specific information about particular careers. So that's like another big piece of what we do. And then we have, we provide one-on-one support, which is the team that I sit in. And so we do Zoom calls with people to talk through their current situation and the options open to them and sort of help them like work out where they want to go in their career. So that's like a bit of a background about 80,000 hours. So just, I guess, focusing in on specifically this like big picture question of like, why do we focus on careers so much at all? Or like, why bother having a nonprofit that's focused on this? Just roughly, it is this significant portion of your life. If you're going to work for 45 years, like I said, it's going to be 80,000 hours of your time. And this is just a huge amount. It's a huge number. It's so much time and effort and energy that you're going to be pouring into this. And specifically, it seems like some careers can actually be really impactful, but they might not be the ones that kind of naturally come to mind. And I think many of the people listening to this are probably in an audience of like being just really smart and being really like altruistic and interested in improving the world. And a lot of the kind of maybe like the mainstream advice that you might hear might push people towards kind of careers like maybe like medicine and like becoming a doctor, or sort of maybe some sort of standard paths in the public service or public sector or something like that. It's actually just like, it doesn't seem like those are actually the most impactful ones that you can do. It seems like some particular paths may be just like vastly more impactful than others. And they may not always be the ones that that you think of immediately when you start thinking about what does an altruistic career look like. So probably the other thing I should have said is like, maybe just like working in a random nonprofit or something just feels like the kind of thing that that maybe sort of people might usually think is looks like doing good. Yeah, I'll talk a bit more about the way that we think about impactful careers to sort of provide a framework for thinking about this kind of thing. So overall, I think for most people, there are many different ways that you can have an impact in the world through like voting and through like community or like organizing and kind of advocacy to your friends and through your own donations. But it seems like your career, at least for most people, and probably for most people listening to this, is probably the biggest opportunity that you have to make a difference in the world. And hence why it's worth taking really seriously, especially when you're at the early stages and you're being able to make some decisions about where you want to go with this, with your career. So seems worth spending some time planning how to improve that. So for example, I think career planning can be like maybe a bit daunting, maybe it doesn't seem like it's hard to sort of try and make yourself spend a bunch of time on it. But it does just seem like when something is really high stakes, spending some proportion of that time planning on trying to make it go better seems worthwhile. So for example, if you were going to go for a 2-hour dinner with some of your friends in non-COVID times where you had a lot of choice over like which restaurant to go to and that kind of thing, if you spent like 6 minutes discussing where to go to try and make sure you went for like a really good option, that's like 5% of the overall time budget, which just seems like worthwhile. You probably would do that. If you're thinking about your 80,000 hour career, if you spend 5 months full time planning that, that's still only like 1% of the time. So if you can spend that 5 months effort trying to make your full career like go 1% better, it seems like that actually ends up being worthwhile. Now, you don't have to spend, in fact, you probably shouldn't spend 5 months sitting in your room, like thinking through career options and trying to like write a really detailed plan. But what you should hopefully do is like spend some time doing that thinking and then some time going out into the world and like trying things out and iterating on your plan and like working out your uncertainties and things like that. But this is just sort of put there as like, just to like flag that spending a bunch of time working on this is more worthwhile than you might immediately think. So yeah, overall, when you're thinking about what you want to do, it's just interesting to think about the sort of maybe like a mini formula of like the different factors that determine how much impact you have. And there are like 4 kind of key bits of that maybe. There's the problem that you focus on. So like, is it climate change or is it global health or whatever? The intervention that you then choose in that area. So is it renewable energy, R&D, or is it like distributing anti-malarial nets, something like that? Then there's how many resources you apply, how many donations or how much of your career or how much volunteering you're going to do. And then lastly, there's your personal fit for the specific thing that you choose. So it seems very intuitive that if you pick something that you're really good at and are going to do really well at, you'll have even more impact than you pick something that you're going to be like mediocre at. So each 4 of these different factors affect the overall impact that you're going to have in this path. And out of those 4, it seems like the first one is actually the one that makes the biggest difference, because there's variation in each of these different factors. You can be like a better fit for some things than others, but the variation between those other factors is not as great as the variation between the different problems. So some problems can just seem like they just might be vastly, vastly more important than other problems. And so that seems to be the kind of, you should think about many of these different bits, but like the focusing on which problem to work on seems like a really important part of the equation. And actually, again, like a little bit more important than maybe you might have otherwise thought. So which problem should you focus on then? And I think, like I said, it seems like the most important choice when thinking about your career. And I guess it comes down to both thinking about your own moral values and then also some empirical stuff about what's like facts about the world. And I think many of you are probably familiar with like the framework of working on things that are important, neglectedness, and tractable. And this is like a frame, these are words that I have now started to use because I prefer this for important, like high stakes. I just think that conveys something really like quite urgent about the idea that there are some problems out there where there's a lot riding on the line. And then solvable, sounds like a pretty good word, but then also instead of thinking about neglectedness, I quite like thinking about where extra effort is needed. Because sometimes it might be at the early stages of a problem. Sometimes it might be a little bit later on when actually there's some momentum has built up and there's like, but it needs like to be kicked up to another level or something like that. But yeah, using these kinds of heuristics to sort of locate which problems might be worth working on seems like a helpful place to start. And when you do that, this is, I think, where I sort of am coming back to the sort of the importance of different problems can end up being really big, especially I think in the sort of how high stakes some of the things are, especially when you think of the, when you start thinking about future generations, what's riding on the line just like could be pretty mind-bogglingly big sometimes. So yeah, I think, like I said, this is kind of like your moral like working out your own moral positions as well as the practical stuff. And I think the working out your position on this stuff is really a useful, worthwhile process. And I think I have been personally surprised with how much I got out of doing, like thinking more about this, even like now, even over the last few months. Because I originally studied moral philosophy and thought I came away with like at an undergraduate level. And thought I came away with like a sense of like, I kind of like this thing, I kind of like this thing. I was sort of like, had some sort of like, I knew I had like intuitions in different places. But then I actually found that when I tried to just create a Google document and sort of write down my answer to the question, what does Habiba value? I just got a lot out of that and tried to clarify like how much I believed in certain theories like utilitarianism, if you're familiar with that, versus things like kindness and being a good person and that kind of thing. So I just definitely do recommend doing a bit of this thinking, even if you've not like formally studied something like moral philosophy or ethics before. You definitely just do have opinions on this because every human by virtue of being alive has got opinions on this kind of stuff, and your intuitions in this area are extremely valuable and like and very valid. So you can there's like a bunch of stuff that you can dive into in terms of literature here, but you actually can be just pretty rewarding to do a bit of introspection as well around what you value here. So a lot of people within the sort of wider effective altruism movement have like converged on welfare and improving well-being as being a pretty important, something that I think many people can agree on as being at least an important constituent of where there is value. It may not be the whole picture, but I think it seems at least to me that it's got to be somewhere in there, like the welfare of creatures that can have pain or pleasure. And I think probably maybe people like interpret this word in different ways, and there are various different theories out there, but it is useful to have something that a lot of people can coordinate on, and something that I think many different people within a movement can sort of converge on and sort of be able to coordinate on. But that isn't like, even if you sort of buy some of that, there definitely isn't the whole picture. There may be other things that you value, either in terms of the sort of the consequences of actions and sort of what other kinds of things, what other kinds of states of the world you care about. And then there may be things that you care about that aren't even to do with like states of the world. So when I'm talking about like what kind of consequences your actions may have, I'm talking about kind of consequentialism, this theory that what matters is the effects of your action, and that's what determines whether they are right or wrong, or how right or wrong they are. And there may be other things that you care about here, like justice or equality or beauty or knowledge or something like that. Like you may think that these are also things that you care about, and that increasing those things in the world is also an important part of like how valuable those actions are. And you may not. And then there may be things that are like not even to do with the consequences that you think are important. So for example, I think for me, I am quite I'm personally quite attracted to the view that sort of like your moral character and being like a kind or good person is actually just an important, inherently valuable thing, as separate from the consequences of your actions. I think many of my colleagues don't believe that. I think many of them are like, many people in 80,000 hours, many other people in the effective altruism community are much more focused on kind of consequences. And there are definitely some of my colleagues who just can't understand how you would ever sacrifice well-being for anything else. It's like, how can you look someone in the eyes and like reduce their personal well-being for some other sort of fancy other value? But I hold firm to my kindness is inherently good view. And so I just wanted to give you a flavor of like, you know, moral philosophy has been going on for a long time. It's not obvious that this is you're gonna like solve it completely, and there's like tons of things you can dive into, and you aren't ever going to be able to read it all. But I think it is really helpful to spend some time thinking about bits of this and working out like roughly where you stand on some of these questions. And also particularly, you may be very familiar with within the effective altruism movement, there are also some like key choice points as well that have kind of that end up sort of maybe putting you into slightly different directions. I mean, a sort of one that's this kind of like focusing like locally within your own country versus globally is, I think, a thing that maybe isn't as contentious to a lot of people in the effective altruism movement. I think many people are very on board with like, you should be impartial globally and sort of, and help the people that you can the most. But there's obviously this like quite a key distinction, which you may have heard a lot discussed about around people who are alive nowadays versus future generations, and sort of long-termism as this idea. And then there's also thinking about like different kinds of creatures, humans, non-human animals, digital minds, maybe even. It's also the case that you do just want to think a bit about practical stuff, empirical things about the world. So, you know, which things are the most neglected and which things are solvable, how influential is right now, how plausible are some of these like big risks. And there's widely diverging opinions on, I think, a lot of this stuff. And I think like I definitely want to hear more people's opinions on all these things as well. I think that, yeah, lively debate is really useful here. So I just wanted to focus specifically briefly on a couple of big things. So long-termism, you may have come across a fair bit. Maybe you've read quite a bit about this. I think it just seems like a particularly important idea to consider and come to your own view on. This is roughly the idea that at least like the welfare of future creatures matter, and perhaps matter just as much as the welfare of people alive today. And then if you add that to a premise that's also like says that the size of the future could be extremely big, then you may end up getting to a conclusion that is actually the large determinant of the most of the sort of moral value of actions is actually to do with how they affect the far future. And that's like a slightly stronger version of long-termism. And long-termism may lead you to different things. It may lead you to thinking that, therefore, working on existential risks ends up being the most important thing, because these are maybe the things that we can most reliably affect, that would really affect the far future. I mean, there aren't many things, one would think, that we can do now that we know what effects they're going to have in thousands or millions of years of time. But like maybe these existential risks are some key things that actually might be able to affect that far in the future. And if that's the case, and if these things are particularly high right now, then we are living at a really crucial time period. And there's plausibly just this huge moral responsibility on our shoulders to like sort of represent the interests of the people that are yet to come. Yeah, it's very much up to us to sort of make sure that they get a chance to live a kind of flourishing life in the future. It may be, though, that you don't think that these existential risks, the chances are that high, or maybe you don't think that, there's all many different reasons why you might not think that these are, like, maybe we can't do very much about them, and actually we're kind of doomed to a slightly shorter time period of existence anyway. So thinking about the future may lead you like in different directions for various reasons. So you may end up wanting to focus on trying to sort of shift the direction that we go in the future. So for example, maybe you're worried that if we don't solve, like change our relationship to non-human animals now, maybe we get locked into a future where we largely carry on treating non-humans in like really bad ways. And maybe it's like, it could be incredibly useful to like switch the direction that we go in, and yeah, like go in a sort of, yeah, like make the future go in a different way. That's like maybe one example of that, but I'm not sure if some people might call that, and some people might call like factory farming forever like a bit more dystopic. So maybe that's, yeah, maybe there's some argument over terminology there. And then just to dive in on existential risks, though, I think I also wanted to clarify that sort of, I think long-termism and existential risks are like different concepts. And so you can care about long-termism and not then work on existential risks. Maybe you want to work on trajectory changes. You can also want to work on existential risks, but not because of long-termism. Like you could want to work on existential risks because you care about the future generations and the sheer size of the future. But you could also just care about reducing existential risks, these catastrophic events, just because of the people that would suffer from the catastrophes if they happened. Like if we have an even worse pandemic than is happening right now, that's just a huge amount of human suffering that would be happening. And that just seems worth reducing, and actually plausibly can end up, depending on what you think about certain things, can be actually just competitive to working on like sort of standard global health things, if you think that the probability of some of these catastrophic things are so high. And then there are a bunch of other reasons that you might want to work on existential risk that actually have like very little to do with long-termism. And these kinds of arguments are set out more by Toby Ord, the philosopher, in the book The Precipice, which many of you may have heard of. Yeah, so then just to flag a little bit about different paths that you might want to consider. So again, I guess trying to do good in the world doesn't just look like working for a nonprofit. It doesn't even just look like working for an effective altruism organization. There are all these different categories of ways that you can try and like have an impact on the world, where you're aiming to work on these really important problems. So you can directly work on them, but you can do research on them, often in an academic setting. You can go into working in the government, and being based in the US at this kind of time, again, just like could be a really important like piece of sort of opportunity that you have, that like many other people sort of throughout time and history just didn't have that opportunity to sort of be able to influence one of these like large actors at a particularly crucial time. You can also do these other things around like advocacy or earning to give. And these last couple of things that I mentioned are like a little bit higher risk and maybe higher reward potentially, if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. I'm going to scoot through some of these a little bit because I do want to talk about, I feel like I'm taking up most of the time with the process stuff, and I want to talk a bit more about the undergrad stuff. But yeah, there's more detail on how to do the actual career planning and what kind of strategies you might pursue in our online career planning article, which has like a worksheet that goes with it, and you can go through and check it, like go through each of the steps. So a little bit about, just to pause there, that's the kind of general, 80,000 hours careers advice that we have. A few of the kind of key points there around why thinking about your career is particularly important, and a little bit of a nudge to think about the sort of the moral considerations and some of the practical considerations, and work out which problems you want to focus on. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about like uniquely what you might want to do while you're at university. So roughly think long term for this kind of stuff. Like you're not going to be doing your best work when you're like 23. You're going to be doing your best work probably when you're in your 50s. I think there are like, you'll get more senior in an organization, you'll get more responsibility, you'll have more control over more money, more people, strategic direction, all that kind of stuff. There are even roles that, you know, are only available to people who are older, certainly in like politics, for example. And that's where you really want to be, you really want to have your sights set on that, on making sure that you're going to be in something that's going to be impactful for all that period of time, and like your peak years are going to be really, really impactful. So when you're in your early stages, you should feel like very empowered to invest in yourself right now. So for all, and that means like all kinds of things. It means like investing in like your mental health, investing in skill building, like building your networks, in general, exploring different things, and putting yourself in a better position for later on. So big kind of push to sort of prioritize this kind of like investing in yourself right now. And then other things that we have this like short article from a while back around advice for undergrads, and there are like a few things that you might want to consider while you're studying. So like one of the things is actually studying on the course that you're supposed to be doing. Another thing might be building other skills in and around that as well that are going to be useful for the future. And then another piece is actually just getting started on some of the career stuff. And the career stuff, like I said, kind of includes spending some time thinking about your values and exploring different problems. And then some of it is actually about exploring specific career paths to the extent that you can, and reducing your uncertainties, and being aware that you don't have to get to final answers on any of this stuff while you're studying, but you can get started in thinking about it. Yeah, like I said, on the thinking about values, like I was making progress on this like a few months ago. It was like 10 years ago I went to university. So ongoing process throughout your life. So studying, obviously, hopefully this is like somewhat useful stuff. In our article, we have some like general heuristics around how you might want to think about picking a major, with the first two being, I think, maybe some of the like slightly more important things, thinking about personal fit, especially if you're thinking about maximizing the sort of chance of getting like really good grades. And then also thinking about like flexibility, prestige, earning potentials. And then you can definitely think about these other things around how what you study fits into your longer term plans. And then also like, maybe it's harder to study STEM subjects by yourself compared to studying moral philosophy by yourself. And I'm allowed to say that because I did moral philosophy, and I'm like, anyone can pick up a moral philosophy book at any point in their life, but it is much harder to like teach yourself I don't know, machine learning or something outside of a university setting. But I wouldn't stress too much about the like longer term plans and the difficulty of learning outside university bits, especially because it's just it's like a lot easier than you might think to switch or to pivot later on. You can always like retrain in another area. The effective altruism movement particularly is chock-a-block full of people who have done the weirdest pivots from like being a doctor to being a machine learning engineer, or doing like a PhD in neuroscience or like volcano seismology and then running a nonprofit. So like all of these things are definitely possible, and you should do what you can to push yourself like in the right direction, but you don't need to stress too much about locking yourself in into any particular path at this stage. And then, yeah, just in general, like the importance of studying, I think we have a, so I feel hesitant about ever like encouraging people to like study less or something, because I come from a very like nerdy background where I'm like, obviously studying is the only important thing. That is not true. I think it is worth flagging that like good grades and getting a perfect GPA is just like not all that. I think it's important for specifically if you want to go into like academia, or there are like professional paths, like you want to get into like specific grad school and you need to get certain grades. So it's like important to that extent, but it is just worth flagging that there are other skills that might just be even more valuable than what you get on your transcript for your future career. And yeah, if you really want like a skeptic about university, then I guess Brian Kaplan with his whole "the case against education" is an interesting thing to dip into. He is just incredibly skeptical that like anything that you learn in university is ever like actually your employers ever really like care about it. It's not like they really like want you to use those particular skills often in a particular job. It's almost all about the kind of signal that you're sending an employer. So yeah, worth bearing in mind a bit. I think particularly because I'm imagining this audience is just like incredibly smart and incredibly hardworking. And so maybe you could do with like a slight push away from optimizing for just pure academic success. Yeah, we also have, I think, some other like ideas in the article about things that you might want to develop. And this is stuff like social skills or like building your network or leadership skills, that kind of thing. The other bit I wanted to just touch on is, what can you do at university to explore your different career options? So like I said, it's like, not to say the same thing again and again, but it is a great time to be thinking about your values. You've got, it's hopefully like some time and access to like cool people to talk to this about. And like the Effective Altruism group, I think, is hopefully a great way of thinking about this kind of thing and to a group of similarly minded people. And then when you're specifically thinking about your career options, you can start making progress to kind of narrow things down. So there's like a bunch of different ways you can do this, like internships, doing research projects, talking to a bunch of people, student societies, side projects, and like just making use of the fact that like you have access to university, so you can just like go to lectures and talk to professors about different subjects. You just don't get that kind of access after you leave university, so it's nice to try and make use of it while you're there. Was there anything else I wanted to say about this? Yeah, I think particularly the research project stuff is pretty interesting. I think maybe other people are a bit different to me, but when I was doing my undergraduate, it just like didn't even cross my mind to really explore doing research. I ended up managing to do, and this was a little bit unusual, but I ended up managing to like not even do a dissertation or a thesis. I just straightforwardly did exams in my third year. That was my entire grade. And so I didn't ever dip a toe into the waters of like, well, would I be interested in doing research? Could I do a self-directed project? And I think I'm probably way on the outlier of that. But if this hasn't occurred to you to like try out doing research, then I think that's, again, this is one of the things that you have pretty unique access to while you're at university. You have like access to libraries and journals online. You have access to professors. You have time to be able to kind of, and flexibility to do this kind of thing. So it seems like, and particularly added to that, the fact that if you are a really good fit for doing research, it could be one of your top options to go for. So putting those two things together, you have a great opportunity to explore it. Plus it could be one of your top options. Seems like a pretty good thing out of all the different things to explore, to try and explore while you're at university. Compared to other things that you could do internships in or something. So just like other things you can check out. I put a link into the advice for